I'm Bob Kelley. I'm the Director of Delivery Engineering at IHG. DevOps is my prime objective right now. I started with IHG about 7 years ago managing teams, and I moved into the director position for application support and delivery management for our direct channels group, which is the website, the mobile web, our content management platform, and the CRO platforms, our call center applications. The things I'm going to talk through tonight are a little bit about our business and give you an idea of the scope of what we're dealing with. Why DevOps is important. I think you're probably picking up on that from the previous presentations. Some key initiatives that we've started and things that we think are important in how we are getting ourselves launched into the whole process. And maybe an idea of what we think DevOps is and is not. And then how we went through doing a maturity assessment for some of our key applications and how we plan to implement the process as we move forward. So a little bit about the company. We are a hotel marketing and management company. We have almost 5,400 hotels worldwide. We're in almost 100 countries, 800,000 rooms. We have 1,700 hotels in the pipeline, so we're growing fairly quickly, and the intent is to grow even faster than that. We have 16 managed brands, and we have more than 120 million reward club accounts. We have development teams in multiple countries around the world. That brings additional complexity in terms of the way you're managing your code bases and when you're doing builds from a test environment and promotion standpoint. We're in 5 data centers. The newest one is in China. Some laws there have changed, and we have to be able to deliver to the Chinese guests directly from inside China. And this summer we'll be launching our web applications in China, which brings some interesting complications to the table for us. We have more than 7,000 VMs in our environments, an app catalog of 600 apps, and more than 100 of those qualify as strategic. We have actually more than 100 dev teams altogether, and some major initiatives that we have are microservice and containerization, so we kind of dovetail well into the conversations that have already been done on stage so far. So when we started, we needed to define at a high level what the objectives were. And I'll take you from a high level into more detail and how we've done this and how we plan to keep going on it. So we knew we wanted a robust delivery platform, and we needed to do this and make sure we understood what we were going to be dealing with from a scale standpoint. When people talk about DevOps, it seems like pace ends up being one of the first things people want to talk about. Everybody's seen the slide that says, you know, Amazon delivers every 11 seconds. And if you try to use that in a conversation with a business person, they're like, well, who cares? Because I don't want my application being delivered every 11 seconds. So you have to be careful what you do in terms of the conversation. But in my mind, you have to build a platform that's designed to build quality into the process. And when you've been successful doing that, the pace will come, and the pace will be whatever each application needs. And when you're doing this across a number of applications, you realize that each one of them has different objectives. An example would be our web property. That's something that we currently release that on a weekly basis, and we probably could do it daily if they wanted to, and probably will move to a daily delivery model for that. Our CRO applications, the call center applications, we have 2,000 call center agents, and they have to be trained when you're going to make a major change. So when you talk about DevOps for somebody who's got that kind of change control in place, they kind of freak out if you have the initial conversation be about how much faster you're going to be able to put change into their production environment. So one of the experiences or one of the things that we're learning is that each team and app is going to have specific needs and objectives, and we have to build a platform that's going to support all of that. We are focusing very highly on the metrics and trying to figure out what to measure in the right place and be able to put that into a dashboarding platform that supports all the users, the business users, the technical users, our delivery managers, software delivery managers, right down to the developers, so they can understand how well we're performing. And so that visibility is a huge factor in the way that we want to build this out. We're into patterns. Anybody that's into software development knows the power of pattern, and so we want to be able to apply and build a framework that supports an appropriate level of pattern, but provides enough flexibility in the core components to allow the teams to do what they have to do, maybe what they need to do, and in a lot of cases, they need to use certain tools. They have different regression suites that were built on different tools, and a lot of them are concerned that an enterprise level program is going to try to do a complete rationalization of things so that they get consolidated down and some of the innovation is taken away from them, and we don't want that to happen. One of the things that I've learned as I've been doing the assessments with the applications is that because we have been kind of siloed, they've done a lot of innovation work that we're going to be able to leverage as we build out the platform. I don't want that to go away. I want that innovation to continue. I just want to do it in a way that we can manage it. Some of the high-level objectives: culture. When you have more than 100 teams in 7 countries, you're going to have a lot of cultural issues, even if it's as simple as communication. I can't just put out an email that says, we're going to start doing this now, because most of my developers don't read my emails anyway. But it spans well beyond that. Each group that I've talked to has had a different set of concerns about what this would mean to them, and recognizing, and I think the one thing that I've, would share with somebody who is intending to start something like this, depending on the scope, would be that culture is going to be a much bigger deal than you think. When I first started, I thought, this is so logical. Who could argue with this? It's really just a matter of making people understand. Well, you'd be surprised how many people will sit across from you and not listen to what you're saying because they're nervous about what you're going to change in their life. And so it has actually taken me almost 2 years to build out enough understanding to get high-level support to move forward with the program. Agility is always a target. Quality is of paramount, and based on the previous presentations, you've already seen that a lot of places, based on the pressure of delivery, the teams are almost forced to push certain best practices aside in order to get to the date that they've been given. I don't know if that happens where you are, but where we are, it's not uncommon for them to provide us with the date that they want something before they actually explain to us what we're supposed to build for them. And so the culture piece goes all the way out to the business side. You have to get them to understand what their role is in making this thing work a little bit better. Security, when you've got an application that's, generating, I think the applications that we support right now generate in excess of $10 billion in revenue. So you can imagine we are a target for attack. We have to have an incredible series of protections put in place to defend against people who think that there's money behind our firewalls. And so we want to build that in from the very beginning. We've seen things where people talk about bringing that later. We're building it in from the beginning. Cost reduction is always something that the finance people want. We're probably more involved in cost avoidance than cost reduction because we have a relatively small team already. We just want to be able to support more people, and because we have such a large number of distributed teams, most of them have someone on the team that's handling some small aspect of the delivery responsibility in terms of running build jobs, running deployment jobs, things like that, that really aren't their prime responsibility. It's a developer who's agreed to take that on. And so what we want to do is we want to give them sort of a service catalog of capabilities out of what we present to them and make the whole process easier so they can redirect their time back into what they want to do, which is write the code. And then innovation. Many companies, large and small, and probably the ones we've read about most are the large, are the ones that are being shocked by the impact innovation is having on them in not necessarily a positive way, right? Disruption is now a coined word that everybody ties back to technology and the impact that it's having on industries and companies that thought they had it locked up. We know we don't have it locked up. We have lots of competition. And so we know that we need to innovate and we need to build processes that will allow us to provide that innovation to our user. So we have guests, lots of those, the 120 million that are Reward Club members and probably millions more that aren't. But we also have owners, we have hotel staff, and we have call center agents. So all of those represent user groups or use cases across the delivery systems that we're supporting. And so we have to make sure that we're doing that in all of those categories. Roles and functions. We can tie this back to the categories on the side: purpose, governance, resource, metrics, and maintenance. If you start having this conversation with a group, you'll realize that everybody's got a different idea of what DevOps is and what they're afraid of. We want to put together a foundation platform that supports their ability to change. They're afraid that we're going to bring a rules-based, cumbersome process to the table that strips away their ability to implement the innovation that we need at their level. One of the things that you'll find when you're talking across the groups, and one of the things that has struck me is that we talk about application owners, and most of the time we're talking about the business people. But I don't think that they have a greater true sense of ownership than the development teams have for the apps that they're putting together. So application owner really spans the group that we're working with. From a governance standpoint, we're probably guilty in the same way a lot of places are. We have governance processes that support the movement of a ticket through a process. And so we have change requests. The change requests have to get approved. They have to be created at a certain time. If they're not done, then you can't do the release at the time you're supposed to. Someone has to approve it. If the approval's not done by a particular time, then you don't get to do the release unless you escalate it to a VP. And that's great. So we've got this seriously awesome governance process for a ticket. But absolutely no governance, relatively speaking, for the quality of the code that's about to go to prod. We want to be involved in building out a governance flow that defines that granular governance capability that comes out of an automated process that allows you to analyze the results of tests, build processes, code analysis, all the things that give you the ability to say whether or not you're really moving something along that should move along. We don't want to be the rule makers, so we're not here to say these are the rules, everybody has to abide by these. We're actually building it so that the governance will be made up of a group of people, and there'll be representatives from the business, from the dev teams, from operations will be a part, and from the current cab, because they're the ones that manage the process. So we won't even manage the process, but we want to be a member because we'll understand what our automation can do in terms of improving governance down to where we think it should be. Our resources are intended to be involved in building out this platform, maintaining the platform, and largely defining and building out service catalog components, reusable code components. We are very much driven to everything as code when we're analyzing a tool. If we can't deal with that on a code level, it loses points for us. We want to be able to repo manage virtually everything that we deal with, and we want to be able to call from the repo. We don't want to have to deal with an interface. And so that's where we're at. We're not intended to be a skills gap bridge. The funny thing that happens when you tell people you're in DevOps is that anything that they can attach to it, they want you to own. Well, we can't own all that. We want to own the piece that we're responsible for. We're going to facilitate how their part works as a part of the flow, and we need everyone to be clear about that separation of responsibility. We are responsible for the metrics relevant to the SDLC, and we actually want to eventually get all the way out to release planning, because there are some cool ways that you can do some value stream mapping as long as your business understands how to do that. And you can actually get an idea of whether or not the things that you've pushed through are having the impact that you want them to have. So we want to build the metrics model that supports that, but we're not the ones that are going to build the metrics model for everything else. I've actually been called into meetings where, oh, you guys are the automation. And they came up with some obscure automation process that was someplace else, and I had to explain to them that we don't do that. The same thing with the metrics. We'll maintain the platform, and we need to break people's concepts of maintaining build scripts, because we want to work away from, and I know for a group of Jenkins, I have to make sure I'm careful about how I say this, but we love Jenkins. We just want to be able to manage it, and when you have hundreds of jobs and dozens of servers and probably hundreds of people playing on those, very hard to manage effectively a flow in that form. So we're not the build script management team. You've had multiple presentations already that talk about why DevOps. These are some of the things that we want our company to benefit from. Obviously, reduced time, innovation is a big deal. We're really very highly focused on our guest. We're a hospitality company, and so as a hospitality company, we really care how people feel about the experience they're having, and I know that sounds like something you should say, but this company really believes it. And it turns out to be one of the reasons why it's a nice place to work, because they're so totally invested in guest experience that when they turn around and deal with the employees, they do that very well, because so much of their focus is on something like that all day long. Business gets a benefit. Strategic innovation, we have multiple containerization projects in flight. We are not doing containers in production right now, but we are on our way, and we expect to be early part of next year. We have started a microservice architecture rebuild, and we have already taken our monolith. We did that last year. Our web application was truly the Frankenstein of web apps. Started off relatively small and got bolted together into something that was pretty scary. We have broken that down now. It's 5 independent single-page apps, and that's increasing. They have associated services, and so we're managing that. We aren't to the stage where we'll be out of control, but we can see that coming, and that's part of why we really want to drive this together. IT management will like this. Our objective is to try to abstract some of the complexity, take the manual processes out, abstract the complexity, and give the dev teams the tools they need to innovate on this flow, and we work with them collaboratively. Environment management, this is a big deal. Environment management, as it ties to the way you see yourself going forward. Static environments are a pain. I mean, I'm trying to come up with a really good term for it, but static environments make it very difficult. And as you work toward shift left testing, moving the testing closer to the developer, figuring out how you're going to be able to get deeper analysis of the code before it gets merged into trunk, and the requirements against the environments, static environments won't work long term. You're going to need to be able to provide testing, and when you start thinking about how am I going to do that if I've got the potential, say, for at any one time 50 or 60 devs trying to contribute to the same application, how am I going to do testing for that? How am I going to optimize the flows so that the developer's not having to wait 2 days to get the results? Dynamic environments are an absolute requirement long term to be able to feed the information back through the process. I thought, well, let's just look at the environment. How complicated can it be? Okay, so I probably shouldn't have asked for the map, right? It's like, holy crap. Okay, yeah, this is a little bit complicated. But anything that you're going to do, you break it down into the component parts, figure out what the process will be to get it put together, and then focus on the piece, and now you're dealing with something that's very doable. Just don't think about it in terms of the big scale, except maybe in the planning phase, because it really helps there. Key initiatives that we're driving through: DevOps Insight. Like I said, we're driving for metrics are a big deal, and we have used them in the past, and they've had a massive impact for us. And so we recognize that if you can't measure it, if you don't know what's going on, you won't know how to make the change. And when I first started, it was, well, this really isn't that hard, because we had such glaring problems. It would be, well, just fix that. But you'll run out of those low-hanging elements fairly quickly, and you'll need to understand where to put your time. And the metrics will help you do that. Shift-left testing, one of those buzz phrases. I like it, though, because it's really what is needed. I've never been in an organization that didn't need to get information to the developers faster and in a more incremental form. Too many places allow multiple developers to commit, and then they'll run a test against it. And we do that in a lot of cases ourselves. We want to be able to give them feedback, and the technology exists now to do that, and that's what we're going to drive for. I've already talked about dynamic environments. We have service virtualization tools. We have multiple, in fact, and we've had different teams using different things. They'll get to continue to use their independent tools, but we have to support all of that. I've already talked about microservices and containers. The process that we're going through is really what you might expect. We've kind of laid out a plan on what we want from a framework standpoint, but we had to do the deep dive to figure out what we wanted to build. And we put together an application assessment. We started by looking at the app list. We burnt that down to the ones that were driving revenue, were strategic in nature, even if they weren't driving revenue, and their prime dependencies. Everything else is a business as usual kind of app, and when you have 600 to look at, you can't do 600, so we had to figure out which ones can we do. We started off with that analysis, we burned it down to that group, and for that group, we did a deep dive analysis into their process. We worked on the framework, and we have a roadmap, and I'll share some of that with you. It's definitely a cooperative effort. We've heard already that we need to release if we're going to release more frequently, we need to release smaller payloads. Often it's the business that needs to understand that you need smaller payloads more than it is the development team. So value stream mapping, some other capabilities, the business team is tied in, app team obviously, testing obviously, DevOps and ops and security. So we started into the process. We started working with each one of the development teams that were in the initial list. We did interviews with the leadership for that application, and then we did interviews with some of the developers for the application, because often their perspectives are different and their attitudes about where they are different. We went through their run books, we went through their SharePoint site if they had one, we went through their wiki pages to try to understand what they had documented so that we could see where they were. The whole thing was built with a DevOps focus, and that's how prepared are you to be able to provide the metrics? How prepared are you in terms of what's your automated regression coverage? Are you doing static code analysis? What kind of branch management are you using? How are you controlling your merges? We knew that we would have to, back to pattern, we have a large pattern, but we have to create flexibility. If you're going to get to a true continuous delivery model, you have to be in a trunk-based development flow. That's such an easy thing to say. Talk to a team and suggest that they do it, and they will ask you if you're crazy. That's really hard to do. And so we've defined 3 branch management strategies that they can work through. We're supporting feature toggles so that they can learn how to abstract the code and they can continue with their release flow without having to separate the code. You can do code by abstraction or branch by abstraction. And you can actually do it in a roles model too, depending on how your application is set up. There are multiple ways to abstract the code, but it takes time to learn how to do that and implement it into the team. So we can't go and say, okay, we want everybody on code or on trunk-based development, and we figure next Thursday would be a good time for that. We defined a series of remediation objectives, and this is just an idea of the impacts that some of those objectives would have for each of the applications. It ties out to whether or not you'll be moving faster, how well you're doing your continuous planning. Release orchestration in general, in our view, is that enterprise level view and understanding what's going on inside your environment at any one point. And so that's going to help everybody. Everybody all the way from the business team to someone who's doing app support. That one you can't miss. Different things are going to help different people. Branch management strategy, consolidation without dictation will support the CI piece, and the CI piece will support CD downstream. If you can't get CI effectively implemented, you probably will never get to continuous delivery. It can't happen. So we're thinking iteratively, just like, imagine a number of you work in a Scrum environment or an Agile environment where you're taught to think iteratively and to think minimum viable product, and we're doing exactly that. I've already talked about the metrics. These are some of the ones that we are requiring. We already are collecting some others, but in order to drive quality, we have a series of quality-oriented metrics that we want to be able to collect. We're not going to define, when you see what we've set up on the right-hand side are targets. The target doesn't mean that we expect you to be there now. It just means that this would be a goal in the future, and each team will be at a different position. Maybe a team's got 60% unit test coverage, so we want that to come up, and we'll work with them on time, and that will vary by application, number of people involved, change sets, age of the code. There's lots of things that tie into how you're actually going to define the timeline goals. This is just the SDLC where we're defining what's going to happen at each level of the flow, whether or not we're virtualizing back-end services, how we are abstracting things as we get closer to prod. We want it to be more prod-like, and where we will drop virtualization. Orchestration is, in my mind, and an enterprise view is paramount to being successful. You have to build it at the component level, but you have to understand what your overarching goal is when you start, or you might not end up with what you intended. This defines what we're trying to do and the benefits that we would expect to get against each of the elements that I've talked about. I want to do a real quick. So we're doing crawl, walk, run. So minimum viable product. Some teams have more elaborate pipelines already. The one that I talked about, that actually I haven't. One of the pipelines that we've built on our team using CloudBees and the new pipeline model, the application that's been broken into multiple apps, when that started, we changed the way we were building. It's all code. We can deliver all 5 or any one in a single thread, and we can do it with a single job. It's all managed in a code base, and so they have a more progressive pipeline, but depending on the app, we'll start them in a simple wrapper that at least moves their code through the flow in the environments. From there, we will increase the sophistication, but notice we still have manual approvals. Even though they may have automation, there are times when automation fails. People know that test always fails. I don't know why the team hasn't pulled that test until they've fixed it. So I don't need my application to stop just because a flaky test broke. So we are giving them ways to work their way through that while we're working on our dynamic environment, while we're working on other levels of automation. And then here you can see the run version is where we've actually implemented dynamic environments, where we're creating environments on the fly to support dev level testing. And this shows that there are multiple flows. We look at it as one large pipeline can break into multiple components using the same code. A dev cycle, so the developer can get feedback. A team cycle, where the team can merge their code and get a team build against the feature that they're working on, and they can see how they're going to do against trunk if they're ready to merge. And then a full delivery certification cycle that takes them all the way to prod. Environment standpoint, like I said, we're in multiple clouds. What this is showing is that we are experimenting now with using third-party clouds like AWS and Google because they have capabilities for environment creation. We're actually intending to use Terraform because we like the portability of that particular app for environment construction. But this ties back to our goal, and the idea is to have those things that can't be put into the dynamic environment housed in a static environment, supporting those environments to enable us to drive specific to the developer. Eventually, we hope, with all of our infrastructure driven as code, that we'll be able to have primarily nothing but dynamic environments, maybe with the exception of certain underlying things, like we still have one mainframe system that might be a little bit hard to put in a container. We're definitely in the eat your own dog food concept, relevant to coding and what we're expecting of the development teams, we're expecting of our team. We want to be able to manage the plugins. We like plugins, but we don't like it when we find that there's 40 more plugins on a server than we thought were there. And not being used anymore because someone just wanted to see what it could do, and then they left it there for us to wonder why something else isn't working. So when we make changes to our pipelines, we put those into our own code base. We do code reviews across that. We're actually working on ideas on how we can build a testing framework to regression test our stuff. And only when it's certified in our development environment does it go into prod. And prod is where the teams are using it. So it's not just prod like prod, it's the prod flow. And from our perspective, team VMs are prod. This is my unsolicited but gratuitous plug for CloudBees. We have a lot of teams. They've got their own Jenkins instances. They're trying things, and that's cool. But as we work our way into this flow, we need to be able to manage that. We need to be able to manage access. We need to be able to manage security. We're going to need them to understand that we're not managing jobs just in that environment. We need to move that job through environments. CloudBees enables us to do that stuff and to do it in a central form. Operations Center is really a very cool application from a DevOps perspective, and if you haven't at least tried it, you probably should, because if you're growing in scale, you'll recognize some significant benefits in terms of managing your Jenkins process. We have compressed our environment, so I don't even know how many, hundreds and hundreds of jobs. We've probably reduced our job count by more than 300 or 400. And like I said, our primary web property, which is generating billions in revenue every year, is now being driven, multiple apps being driven on a single job, things that you can do. So going back to that one, and to tie into my final comment, if you look at this, this probably represents a lot of pipelines that people are dealing with, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to work on. And when you look at it, even potentially against my presentation, you realize there's a ton to do. But I thought this was interesting. I did a little analysis. We use Chef, we use Jenkins, and so we have the build automation and we have the deploy automation. And a lot of teams think that they've got it all going on and consider that to be a well-automated pipeline. What I'm showing you here is that for most apps, it takes 2 to 6 or 7 minutes to build it. It takes 3 to 5, maybe 10 minutes, depending on the app and whether or not you're doing servers and clusters all at once or rolling restart. For this, 5 minutes to do the deploy. Then your testing starts. Depending on where you are from a regression standpoint, you might have 20 minutes, you might have 2 hours, you might have 2 weeks worth of testing that has to be done before you can deploy to the next environment and do the same thing. This is an analysis that yields where's the obvious stuff to work on. Because if you look at that, the numbers in red show that the best that you're doing out of this relevant to those values is 11% of the total time has been automated. And at the worst, 0.03%. So on both vectors, quality and pace, I believe you're going to find that testing is going to be the long pole in the tent to get you to where you really want to be. And that's one of the reasons we did the application assessments. We're setting goals. We're not assuming that we're going to be able to take our teams from 50% automation coverage to 100% automation coverage in some short amount of time. But if you don't set the goals and measure the progress, you probably won't move it nearly as fast as you want to. So we'll negotiate, we'll set the goals reasonably, but the whole idea is to press in that way. Shift left the test so that you get things identified faster, And ultimately, a quality process will deliver for you a cadence that will match to whatever your particular application's needs are.